Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us at the Manhattan Family Justice Center. Each year, more than 2,000 New Yorkers walk into this center. They come here because they can't take it anymore, because they won't take it anymore, because they will not spend another night counting each beer their boyfriend drinks, hoping he'll pass out before he gets violent, because they cannot bring themselves to make up yet another story about another bruise, because they will not put their child's future at risk for one more day, even if that means giving up their apartment, their paycheck, or hope of justice. And too often, that is what leaving means. Too often, domestic violence is just the first of many injustices heaped upon victims of abuse. Consider this troubling statistic. 30% of all families in shelter are victims of domestic violence. That makes it the most common cause of shelter admission by far. Just take a moment to think about that. 30% of those seeking admission to a shelter were forced to leave their own home, often with their children in tow, because someone was abusing them. Now, how is that fair? Why is the default position that the victim has to leave? And let's not kid ourselves here. This is not an isolated problem. There are far more victims than most people realize. Every day, the NYPD gets roughly 800 calls about domestic violence, which is just a fraction of the true number because so many people are afraid to report the abuser. These calls come from all over the city and cut across all social and economic lines. I often say that every one of us has a mental health story. Well, I would bet that every one of us knows someone who has lived in fear of physical or emotional violence, someone who has been hurt by a person who professes to care for them. I certainly do. It is time for us to come together as a city and hold those who abuse others accountable for their behavior. It is time for us as a city to change the culture of allowing abusers to push their partners and their children out of their homes. It is time for us as a city to protect the rights of victims, to create a city that is safe for everyone, women, children, and men. Mayor de Blasio will speak in a moment and announce some powerful new tools we are putting in place to help victims become survivors. But first, it is my great honor to introduce a woman who has devoted her life to the cause of justice, Judge Judy Kluger.
Thank you.
In 2014, Judge Kluger became the executive director of Sanctuary for Families after serving 25 years on the bench. Sanctuary for Families is at all 5 of our family justice centers, providing guidance and hope to people in their hour of greatest need. I am proud to count Judge Kluger as an ally, and I am tremendously grateful to her and her team for answering the call to service. Judge Kluger, would you mind sharing a few thoughts with us?
Thank you so much. And first of all, I'm thrilled to be here representing Sanctuary for Families and all the other agencies in this room, the people behind me and in the audience who assist victims of domestic violence. And Mr. Mayor and First Lady, you've done such an amazing job in hearing our voices and doing so much for survivors. And of course, Commissioner Noel, who has been a great leader in the fight against domestic violence. So just imagine a survivor of domestic violence where your financial security is so critical to your ability to leave your abuser and seek help for yourself and your children. Imagine the impossible of having to decide whether you can file an order of protection or you will lose your job. Imagine not being able to file a police report and having your pay docked. All these decisions will be much easier because of the initiatives that the mayor will be describing. I just want to bring the personal into this for one of our survivors who, because of confidentiality, is not here. But I think if you heard a little bit about her story, you can understand how critical these changes will be for the life of all the survivors in our city. So I'll call her Fatima. Challenges get in the way of dreams and aspirations, and when they do, the paramount step is to find a way around the situation to still pursue your dreams and desires. Once in life, I faced a tremendous setback. As a kid, I envisioned a future full of achievement. I wanted to impact the world, get education, make a significant difference in life. As a young girl from a rural part of Nigeria, all I wanted to be was different. There was not regard there for education. People in my town were ignorant of the meaningful of education. It was devastating. Education was only my way out of poverty. Arriving in the U.S., I felt liberated from the anguish I had undergone. Confused and afraid about what would happen next, I felt as though I was tarnished. Heavily pregnant, I found myself around strangers, a piece of broken dreams, a victim of domestic violence. I came across Sanctuary and the services that were available. I was able to find a life for myself and my children. Without the help that's available in New York City, this would not have been possible. So Fatima's life will be made even better and easier with the initiatives that the mayor will outline. And we thank him and the First Lady for their leadership. And thank you all for being here to recognize the voices of domestic violence victims. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge. I want to say, Judge, thank you for the work you've done in public service. Thank you for the work you're doing now with Sanctuary for Families and for all of your team, for all the people you protect, for all the people you help. Let's give the judge a big round of applause. Thank her. This is a sacred cause. There are so many people in this room who have devoted themselves to protecting victims of domestic violence and understand this is yet another area where we have to overcome stigma. We have that additional challenge of talking about this issue out in the open and getting people to feel comfortable coming forward and giving them the assurance that help will be there for them. There are so many good people in this room who have done this work, and it's tough, tough work. And I want to name them, and at the end, I'd like them all to get a round of applause. I want to first thank from our administration, of course, our wonderful Commissioner for the Office to Combat Domestic Violence, Cecile Noel. Thank you for your tremendous leadership. Our Commissioner for Consumer Affairs, Lorelei Salas. Our Executive Director for Commission on Gender Equity, Azi Khalili. And then the organizations that are truly our partners in this work who are present. I'd like to acknowledge all of them: Safe Horizon, A Better Balance, the Urban Resource Institute, the NYC Anti-Violence Project, Legal Momentum, and the Violence Intervention Program. Let's give them all a round of applause. Judge talked about Fatima's story, and there are many women like Fatima in this city struggling for fairness and often, too often, feeling alone. And it's our job to reach them and support them. Imagine what a victim goes through, feeling that their life has been upended. Their home is no longer safe. The person they thought loved them is now also their abuser. Imagine how unsettling, imagine how confusing. There's a sense in that kind of situation that there are no more options, that there's only danger, that anywhere you turn could put you in harm's way. And then there's all the rest of life to think about. How do you earn money? Where are you going to live? Can you stay in your home safely? Will you be able to keep your home? All of these issues are challenges for victims who already have enough to deal with. Our job is to answer those questions, to lighten those burdens, to be there shoulder to shoulder with anyone who is a victim of abuse. Charlene made the point that this is a problem in every part of our city. Let no one have the illusion this only affects some neighborhoods or some demographic pieces of our city. This affects everyone. Unfortunately, this is a scourge that we see across all economic levels, all backgrounds. Last year, the NYPD received, on average, one domestic violence report every 2 minutes. That's how prevalent the reality is in this city. And we do not accept that status quo. That is an unacceptable state of affairs in the greatest city in the world, and we aim to change it. We will not tolerate domestic violence, and we will use every tool at our disposal to stop it and to stop the abusers, to support the victims. Now, our vision of supporting victims, again, goes well beyond the criminal justice element of the equation. You're going to hear from the NYPD momentarily, and we expect them, of course, to continue to deepen their efforts to stop domestic violence before it ever happens and to combat recidivism. And they're going to talk to you about their very aggressive plans to do that. But we have to address the rest of the equation as well. Because a victim who fears for her job and her livelihood, a victim who doesn't know where she will live, is experiencing double jeopardy. We're not going to let that happen. We're not going to see someone who's been victimized once victimized again by their circumstances. So we say enough. We are going to protect the livelihoods of those who have experienced domestic violence. We're going to protect their ability to take care of themselves and their children. No person, and so often, of course, it is a woman, no woman should have to decide between her safety and her paycheck. We need to make sure that work will be protected, not interrupted, that pay will be protected, not interrupted, while a woman pursues justice, while she takes care of the things she needs to ensure her safety. You're going to hear from Councilmember Jalissa Ferreras Copeland in a moment, and we're joining with her to introduce paid safe leave legislation, paid safe leave, allowing survivors to take time off, paid time off from work, while they're getting the help and the justice they deserve. Also today, we say enough. No one should have to decide between their safety and their home. Too often, the consequence of fleeing an abuser means losing your home forever, which is outrageous and goes against everything we believe in and only adds pain to the victim and her family. So we are coming to the defense of victims in a new way. If you are a victim of domestic violence in this city and you need to protect your housing, we will provide you a lawyer for free to do so. In fact, we will guarantee you a lawyer to protect your right to housing. That will give victims the support they need to pursue every option, including getting the abuser off the lease of their apartment if that's the best course of action. And if someone who's a victim has to get off the lease themselves to move elsewhere, the lawyer will help ensure that they can do that without any penalty. It's so important that survivors know that they have rights and those rights will be defended by the City of New York. Finally, today we say enough. No victim of domestic violence should be victimized again. No one who has experienced it should ever have to worry about recidivism. They should never have to worry that their abuser will come back again to harm them. We know that is a daunting task because too many abusers repeat their behavior. 60% are arrested again within 5 years. But now the NYPD will be applying a new set of very aggressive approaches to crack down on abusers and recidivism, using all the powerful tools of precision policing that have led to the consistent drop in crime in this city, and with a new focus on stopping domestic violence. When someone violates an order of exclusion, and the NYPD will go into detail on this, when someone violates an order of exclusion, the NYPD will immediately and proactively seek the arrest of that individual. They will not require a report from the victim to do so. And as the NYPD has done more and more, they will provide additional support to the victim and additional outreach to the victim to help them with all of their challenges. There will be a systematic effort to combat recidivism and to bring out in the open the fact that it is unacceptable to commit an act of domestic violence, and there will be very, very sharp and clear penalties. For so many of us, we can remember not so many years ago in our society, it was typical that people didn't talk about these issues. They felt it wasn't the kind of thing that should be brought out in the open. It was taboo, that somehow a survivor was tainted instead of being seen as someone who deserved justice. I want to let all New Yorkers who have experienced domestic violence or who live in fear for themselves or their children know that we are with you, we stand by you. Come forward and we will help you. Do not think this is a private matter. Do not feel you are alone. You are not alone. The City of New York will stand by you with all of our power and all of our resources. This is not a private issue. This is not an individual problem. It's all of our problem. This is something we have to solve together. We're taking steps today to give people the security they deserve, freedom to go on with their lives, free of fear, and to know that help is always there for them. If anyone in this city believes that someone is in danger and there is a domestic violence emergency, please call 911 immediately and report it. Do not hesitate. Do not hesitate. Call 911 if you believe someone's life is in danger. If you know someone needs help, and it's not an emergency, but they need help, call 311 and they will be connected to help. We want people to know there are ways to get help. Very quickly in Spanish. La violencia doméstica afecta a todo tipo de personas en nuestra ciudad. Hoy estamos defendiendo los derechos de las víctimas para que no pierdan sus hogares, sus trabajos o sus vidas. Y estamos tomando medidas nuevas contra los que abusan de otras personas. Si usted o alguien que conoce necesita ayuda, por favor llame al 311. With that, I want to introduce the sponsor of paid safe leave legislation in the City Council, Councilmember Julissa Ferreras Copeland.
Good morning, and thank you to Mayor de Blasio, First Lady McCray, and all of my colleagues across the administration and the council for being here today. I'd also like to thank the advocates who come together to protect women and survivors of domestic violence and who work every day tirelessly to make the city safer and more supportive. As the mayor mentioned, tomorrow we will be introducing in conjunction with the mayor legislation that will turn the lights back on. Legislation to expand the Paid Sick Leave Act so that it includes safe leave. Years ago, when the mayor, the public advocate, and I fought for paid sick days, we knew that the workers who would most benefit from the policy would be working women, who often juggle childcare or care of other family members when they are sick. These workers did not deserve to lose pay, even risk losing their jobs because they needed to take sick time. And today, the legislation is successful in supporting workers and their families across our city. The bill will be introducing on Thursday, we believe will make a necessary improvement and expansion of the legislation. In addition to being a situation I hope no woman goes through and that we must work to combat and end, we know that being a victim of domestic violence affects your productivity at work. We know that it can come with additional requests on your time to address the aftermath. From visits to the attorneys, to doctor trips, to counseling services, meeting with the district attorney or your local precinct. We know that it can come with additional need for support. No one should be penalized for taking time to respond and get the support they need to address their situation. The same is true of paid sick leave, should be true here for paid safe leave. The bill would add protections for any domestic violence situation to the Paid Sick Leave Act. The city should stand behind survivors and make sure that safety is the priority. This is one way we can do it, by removing the concerns about losing a paycheck or day's pay from their minds so that they can focus on what they need during this time, whether it is to obtain services from domestic violence shelter or a rape crisis center, to participate in safety planning or temporarily or permanently relocate, to meet with civil attorneys or other social service providers, to file a domestic incident report with law enforcement, to meet with the DA, to enroll your children in a new school. Victims, survivors of domestic violence have varied needs, and we should be standing with them as a city. No survivor of domestic violence should have to ask whether they can afford to do what is necessary to keep themselves and their families safe. That is what paid safe leave is about, and why I am excited to introduce this tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Now I want to have you hear from the NYPD, which is redoubling their efforts to combat domestic violence. First, I want you to hear from Deputy Chief Martin Morales, the head of the Domestic Violence Unit.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First, Mr. Mayor, First Lady, I thank you for your leadership on this most important issue. I've been in this profession for almost 30 years, and domestic violence does tear at me. It's something that I am committed to stop the goal. I should say, we have a goal that we want to stop this vicious cycle we all know too well. I am committed to that commitment, to that goal. Today, we are expanding our commitment to aggressively combat domestic violence the way we've driven down other crime through precision policing, through very specific approaches that go right to the specific facts of the problem. We're going to be targeting our top offenders. Top offenders not only that violate order protections, top offenders that we're looking for other type of assaults or felonies against and misdemeanors against their intimate partners. We are committed to stopping that abuse. We'll be formulating a plan in which the domestic violence officers, the neighborhood coordination officers, the Detective Bureau, the Housing Bureau will conduct joint DV operations targeting our top DV offenders. This is going to be a systematic approach to putting those in prison where they belong for domestic violence.
Thank you very much, Chief. Now I'd like you to hear from Deputy Commissioner for Collaborative Policing at the NYPD, Susan Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, First Lady, everyone else at the table, and our many partners who are in the room. As you know, over the last 20 or so years, the NYPD, working together with many of our partners in criminal justice and law enforcement and community-based organizations, we've been able to bring homicide down to record lows. Other serious offenses have dropped precipitously as well. If we are going to get the homicide rate down, the incidence of homicide down even further, domestic violence is really the next frontier. So we are focusing, redoubling, as the mayor said, we are redoubling our efforts in this area. And what that means in particular is that we'll be using the new resources of the neighborhood-based policing, the NCO officers, the sector officers, who will be spending their time in small neighborhoods within a precinct, getting to know the community, probably having access to information and to people who would never have contacted us otherwise. So we will know more. We'll get more information on the ground from people who are victims of domestic violence, not only about what they are experiencing, but information about the person who is causing the violence. So, in that regard, one of the problems that's particularly insidious is when an offender violates an order of protection, and particularly an exclusionary order. What that means is that a victim has already sought help. They've already reached out to us and said, there's a really serious problem. He's attacking me, he's violent, he's abusing me. The victim has already gone to court, and a judge has said, this person who's committing these offenses needs to not only have no contact from you, no contact with you, but needs to leave the premises. So a court has ordered the exclusion of the offender. So when that offender returns to the home, they are not only there probably to commit another crime, but they are violating a specific court order. And that is another offense on top of it. And it's an added problem because it means that the offender is flaunting the criminal justice system, not just abusing the victim. So in that regard, in the past, with limited resources, what we've needed to do often is rely on a victim to say, I'll tell you when he comes back. I'll tell you when he reappears. And then you come and arrest him. And now, with additional resources, we will be able to go find him. Take the time to find out where he is. The NCOs, the sector officers, the DVOs are more likely to arrest a person who has violated an order of protection now than they ever were before. Well, this isn't only just our responsibility, though. Accountability is a shared responsibility. So we'll be working with DAs across the city to make sure that we're building the strongest cases possible. We can just arrest the offender. Then it's up to the DA and the courts to hold the offender accountable. So we'll be working closely with the DAs to make sure that we are collecting the evidence, building the strongest cases possible. We take these crimes incredibly seriously. We are well aware of the damage not only to the victim, but the victim's family and to all of our communities. This is not just a personal crime. Take the domestic violence out of domestic violence. This is violence. It's just violence that happens to happen between intimate partners. But it is violence, nevertheless. And it harms individuals, it harms families, and it harms communities. So today, I am very pleased to say we will be taking a much more aggressive approach to combating domestic violence, and we thank you for your commitment to this.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner. Now I'd like you to hear from two elected officials who have made this a focal point of a lot of their public service. First, our public advocate, Tish James.
Good morning. I want to thank Mayor de Blasio, First Lady McCray, Judge Judy Harris Kluger, who I had the opportunity to practice before as a former public defender. It's an honor and a privilege to work with her again. Councilmember Ferris Copeland, Assemblywoman Joanne Simon, NYPD, and all of the advocates here. Every minute, 20 Americans, men, women, and transgender individuals are victims of domestic violence. And although crime in New York City is at historic lows, violent crimes related to domestic violence is on the rise. This is a problem we face throughout the country, but it is certainly all too pervasive in New York City. And it's a particular problem within residents of public housing. Victims often suffer in silence. And too often, victims of domestic violence are doubly victimized. They are forced to miss days of work to recover from the trauma. They are forced out of their homes to escape the violence. They're forced into shelters because they have no other place to turn. And too often, they remain with their abuser. And as someone who represented quite a few, I can remember how they would remain with their abuser, enduring the abuse because they have no other options. You see, when the choice is between putting food on the table for your children or living on the streets, it's not always so simple as just to get up and walk away. It's easy to say, but it's really hard to do. The cycle of victimization must end. I want to thank Mayor de Blasio and I want to thank the First Lady for their leadership on this issue, because they know that too many men, women, and transgender individuals in the city are stuck in cycles of abuse and subjected to even more problems as a result. And too many children suffer and they're caught in this complicated web, and we see the consequences in their conduct, in their schools, and on the playground. Victims of domestic violence should never forfeit a salary or even risk losing their jobs because they need time to recover. But victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work each year. And this loss of wages trickles down to children who need food on the table. But again, I want to thank my friend and my colleague, Councilmember Copeland's legislation. I want to thank her for introducing this legislation, because victims will be able to take paid leave from work to attend to immediate safety needs without fear of penalty. Victims of domestic abuse should never be driven out of their homes and into a shelter because they don't have another safe place to live. But having a lawyer, having an attorney, having representation to protect your rights and to restrict an abuser's access to a survivor's home will change that. And victims of domestic violence should never be re-abused, a reality we will fix with the help of NYPD and their commitment to reaching out to 100% of men, women, and transgender individuals who receive protective orders in an effort to end and to prevent the cycle of abuse. And sadly, we know that we cannot always stop domestic abuse from happening, but we can put protective and supportive policies in place to ensure that victims are not stuck in a cycle of re-victimization and have the resources they need to get back on their feet and feel safe and secure. I look forward to working with the mayor, with the First Lady, with my colleagues in government to stop the pain that so many families are dealing with in New York City, and to let individuals know that you are more than just a victim, that you deserve more. And now, with the force and the power of the mayor and his administration and NYPD, you are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Public Advocate. Now, Assembly Member Joanne Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the First Lady and to Councilmember Ferreras and to our public advocate, the NYPD, and all of the advocates. You know, we are here because people have come together to recognize this very destructive force in our society. And we are here because the advocates have not given up and keep pressing this issue. What's critically important, I think, about today's announcement is that there are steps we can take now. There's much that we need to do, but there are real steps we can take now to ensure that victims of domestic abuse do not lose pay and do not lose their jobs because they need to take care of the aftermath of domestic violence, and to provide counsel. The right to counsel so that people know what their rights are and they know that their story and their experience needs to be respected. That's critically important, and that won't come unless people have a right to counsel. And better enforcement from the NYPD in a systematic way is also critically important, because we know for too long people not only did people feel ashamed to report these things, but there was a very pervasive sense in our society that somehow the victim was partially to blame. We see that throughout our society still. It's something that will take a long time to eliminate, but by respecting the stories and the experiences of people who are victims of domestic violence, we will take real concrete steps to reducing domestic violence and hopefully eliminating it from our society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. Before we take questions, I just want to thank and acknowledge the Executive Director of the New York State Nurses Association, Jill Ferrillo. Thank you for your partnership as well. I'm going to take questions on the topic we're discussing here, then we'll take questions on other topics. Yes, Anna?
Some of the legal options that are noted in the press release have to do with leases and say restricting an abuser's access to a survivor's home, but what legal options are there if the abuser owns, like, the house? It's not a apartment, it's a house or a co-op or something. What are the legal options for that?
I'll start as the non-lawyer, and then the various lawyers can jump in. We're starting from a common sense place here, that the victim should not be doubly victimized. And we want to look for every legal angle to get the survivor what she needs, whether it is better for her, and particularly there's children, to stay in that home or move to a different home, to not be penalized in the process and not go through that double jeopardy. So we believe each case is individual, but the presence of a lawyer gives a much greater chance of getting an outcome that supports the victim's needs. Please.
So the law in New York is pretty well settled that a judge can order an abuser out of a home even if they own the home. It's been litigated. It's the power that's inherent in the order of protection, and it is enforced and will continue to be enforced. I think the important part of some of the others, Mayor's statements and the initiatives is there will be the ability to go to housing court and have the prevent eviction if that's at risk of the survivor, or get out of a lease that she would be required to be a part of. But as far as of keeping abuser out of the home, that's well settled law, and it's done.
Hold on a second.
I just want to add that a real problem here, as you can imagine, is that to many people this is kind of counterintuitive. They don't know that this is a legal option. So by having lawyers in the family justice centers right there, they'll be proactively counseled about these rights even before they may ask the question, so that they can hear that they have more options than they may know.
Please.
I think you might be confusing possession versus ownership, and it's two separate things. We are talking in this particular case about possession and not ownership. The individual will still claim ownership to the property, but in terms of possession, he will be out of possession, and the law is clear on that.
Go ahead. You have a follow-up?
No.
You're good? Okay. Other questions? David?
Contemplating on the NYPD side any extension or attempt to extend the must-arrest situations that apply in domestic violence cases?
No, these are mandatory arrests. The violations of an order of protection is a mandatory arrest.
Contemplating any extension of that? Into
Not at this time, no.
In the back?
Can you explain, again, I'm a little confused about what is the current process for when someone has violated the order of protection or order of exclusion, where you said that you're relying on the victim to tell you when he comes?
So the violation of an order of protection is currently a mandatory arrest. What we're adding is more resources so that we can actually effectuate those arrests. We're using not only domestic violence officers, but neighborhood coordination officers and sector officers who are routinely in small neighborhoods within precincts and will be able to have access to more information than we might otherwise have had. So we'll not only be hoping that the victim will be able to tell us this is where he is, this is where he's in my house, or this is where he hangs out, but we'll have more people who can go look for him and effect that arrest.
I want to just add to that, it's both more people because of the nature of neighborhood policing and because 2,000 more officers are in the process of coming onto the force. But it's also more intelligence gathering. One of the things you'll see more and more about neighborhood policing is it gives the NYPD much more intelligence gathering capacity at the local level. So this very example, if the victim is in a situation where she can't report for fear of danger or is feeling uncomfortable at reporting, but a neighborhood coordinating officer can get the information from another source, they can go and make that arrest right away. So the point is we want to be more proactive, use that intelligence gathering capacity to look for the first available option to arrest that individual. Okay, way back.
I just wanted to address
Louder.
I wanted to address a question to the entire panel. Has anyone on the panel been a victim of domestic violence? And if so, how has that affected you in participating in this? Has it given you any particular personal insight?
Anyone want to respond? Please go ahead.
I haven't been a victim of domestic violence, but thankfully, but those of us who work with survivors get a very clear picture of what they need. As a matter of fact, we had a survivors conference on Sunday and heard the voices of our survivors, and including 2 members of Sanctuary's board who are survivors of domestic violence. So part of how we inform our work is by hearing what they have to say.
Thank you.
And
Tish.
what's happened today what's been announced is very much in line with what survivors want and need.
Thank you, Tish.
So I've not been a victim, but I've seen it in my family, and I have also represented both defendants as well as victims. And in fact, when I used to practice before Judge Kluger, there was quite a few defendants that I represented, and there were a number of victims that I've represented as well on the civil side. So I know their stories, and as I go out all throughout the city of New York, and particularly when I have town hall meetings, particularly in public housing, I hear a lot, and they suffer in silence.
Go ahead.
Any part of this review or a review plan in terms of how well district attorneys are bringing these cases?
NYPD want to speak to that?
We work very closely with the district attorneys, and as I said, we will be working to enhance our cases, and we'll be tracking what happens after we make arrests.
Focus in district attorneys' offices?
Absolutely.
Is there a difference across the boroughs?
I'd just like to say each of the offices has a domestic violence unit, and they take, and having been a prosecutor a long time ago, violations of orders of protection are taken extremely seriously because you've already had one act, and now there's been a violation of a court order. So, and I think we've come a long way, both in terms of policing, prosecuting, and what the mayor has been saying. So there is a real effort, and they do a good job.
Lastly, is there any different approach being considered in terms of when there's domestic violence allegations against police officers?
When you say different approach, I'm confused by the question.
Well, is there any reevaluation of how district attorneys handle cases when police officers are involved?
I can't speak for the DAs, but I can tell you.
For example, with the governor's executive order to have the attorney general be a special prosecutor when police involve killings of unarmed individuals.
Yeah, I think that's a worthy question for district attorneys. I think the across-the-board reality is that all elements of law enforcement are focusing more on domestic violence, including the fact that there's been a great focus on trying to get people to come forward. We've said this to you. I think you've been at a lot of the monthly briefings on the crime statistics. We think, even though it's a painful reality, it is so important that more and more people are coming forward and we're showing the accurate picture of what's going on. But with that, at the same time, is an increased focus. More and more resources are going to be put into stopping it. I believe that's happening at the district attorney offices too, but in terms of that specific question, I think that should be directed to them, way in the back.
Numbers that you give us are so alarming. I was wondering if you could give us some insight on why domestic violence is increasing at a time where you would think that people would start to get to know not to do it.
I'll start and then pass it to the experts. Again, one part of this is unquestionably greater reporting, and that is a painful reality to confront, but it also, in its own way, means we are moving forward because we're bringing out into light a reality that was hidden. We are bringing out into the light the fact that so many people have been suffering, and that means we can go at the problem better and address it better and protect them better. So that's certainly one part of what is going on here. Clearly, there's real problems in our society that have not been addressed about the treatment of women, about what's an acceptable way for people to express themselves. There's some real underlying things here that we're trying to get at. But one of the first things we can do is increase the level of consequence. This, I think, pervades this whole discussion today. There are going to be more and more abusers arrested. There are going to be more and more abusers who find that they're staring down the barrel of a lawyer who will stop them from having possession of their home if they've abused someone. There's going to be more and more support for the survivors. And I think that will send a message unto itself.
I just want to clarify, if you look at homicides, just homicides, in 2000 in the city we had 673 homicides, and in 2015 we had 352. In 2000 we had 78 family-related homicides or DV-related homicides. In 2015 we had 49. These numbers have gone down. They've both gone down. We still have an unacceptably high level of domestic violence. Any domestic violence homicide is too much. We know who the offender is. We know who the victim is. We need to do all we can to stop the violence when we're aware of both of these people.
Yes.
Just wondering if you could specify what the legislation is going to call for the paid state leave, which employers are covered, how much time will be allowed, but also are the victims going to have to specify to their employers, I need this time off for domestic violence issues? How does that work?
So, as you know, this is the introduction of the legislation, so we're going to be working through the legislative process. But this is basically an amendment too. So, as you accrue your paid sick days, this will give you an option to use your paid sick time as a safe time. But as the legislation currently suggests, you would have to inform your employer that you're going to be taking time off to go to either counseling or to an attorney, but it will be included in the time that you've already accrued through your paid sick time.
Want to add, Commissioner?
Yes. So currently, the paid sick leave law says that employers cannot ask an employee to explain the reasons why they're taking the first 3 days of sick leave. So after the third day, after the third consecutive day, then the employer can request for some kind of proof. So it will be the same case here. The victim of domestic violence will not have to disclose the reasons why for the first 3 consecutive days. But after those 3 days, they may have to provide some kind of proof.
You know, and it would also be similar to going to an HR director on something personal. It doesn't mean that your immediate boss would necessarily know. It would be like other times, I imagine, that you're going to HR to say, I have to take off for this particular reason. It would not be something that should be or would be public to the agency.
And there's obviously protections against any discrimination, too, baked in previous human rights law. Yes, Jen?
Just to follow up on that question, what kind of proof would it be? Would you need to go to the police? Would you need to, how do you prove this is going on?
Good question.
So, yes, they can provide, for instance, a notice from the court that they have to go to court. They can provide a notice from a social services provider or counselor that has met with them. In absence of that, they can also provide a notarized letter.
Okay. Yes.
Notarized letter from whom?
Hold on a second. I'm sorry.
So the employee can just write down the reasons why they needed to take that day and have it notarized.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, is there an added cost in these initiatives in terms of providing lawyers? Is there an added cost?
In terms of lawyers, there's initial added cost of $500,000, and that cost could rise depending on demand. But we think, obviously, it's an extraordinarily worthy expense and one that's going to protect the rights of victims. In terms of the other matters, obviously, for example, the NYPD initiatives are all baked into what we're already doing with the expansion of the force and with neighborhood policing. Yes?
Given how automatic these exclusion orders tend to be when one is arrested, have you discussed with legal aid the prospect of pumping more people into the criminal justice system, and perhaps the public advocate as a former public defender can weigh in on that?
Can you just clarify the question? When you say the prospect, how do you mean that?
So clearly more people are going to be arrested and more people are going to be charged with, Judge, is it a felony to violate an order of protection?
Sometimes, yeah, it can.
For a misdemeanor, they're accused, they're not convicted, they're now going to be charged with a felony. There are going to be more people in the system. How does that dovetail with your, desire to have fewer people in the system? And B, have you discussed with legal aid, what this all means?
I'm just going to open and happy to have the Deputy Commissioner and the Public Advocate Judge all weigh in. This is about stopping violence. So we have never hesitated when it comes to stopping violence to say, yes, people are going to be involved in the criminal justice system. This is also about prevention. I fundamentally believe when you create a culture of consequence, it changes behavior. So abusers are going to learn really quickly that there's more and more effort being made to get them, and more defense being provided for the victim. I think for some that could have an impact on behavior. But I think a lot of us who believe we need to change the approach to incarceration are focused on nonviolent crimes, where too many people have served too much time. We're talking here about violent crime, and that we intend to be very, very rigorous. Do you want to add?
I would just agree that if you hold someone accountable earlier in this cycle, it's very possible that the cycle will stop. People continue to batter because they get away with battering. If they don't get away with it, it's much more likely that it'll stop.
Exactly. Public advocate.
So obviously, I oppose selective prosecution, but this effort is focusing on making a distinction between diverting nonviolent misdemeanors and violations from an overburdened criminal justice system and focusing on violent offenders. And that's where the focus should be, and that's where NYPD should use their resources to focus on violent offenders in the city of New York.
Yeah.
Deputy Commissioner, holding the offenders accountable. They've been convicted of nothing, they're just accused.
Well, they're accused, and there's a temporary order that's issued, and then soon after, there's a permanent order that's issued, and there's a full hearing in order to issue that order.
Okay. Who else? Yes.
Do you know which neighborhoods have the highest incidence of domestic violence, and are NCOs in place there to offer the extra resources? And also, how many domestic violence officers are there?
Sure. Currently, we have 450 domestic violence officers, investigators, and sergeants throughout 76 precincts and the 9 police service areas, the housing precincts. Our busiest location is in the 7-5 in Bed-Stuy, which is a new NCO command.
Okay. Yes, Anna.
How many of those 450 are on Staten Island or in the Staten Island precinct?
I don't have that breakdown in front of me, but I would say,
we can get it.
you know, I could get that to you. We have, you know, each precinct has a sergeant. They have anywhere from 4 to 6 officers working for them.
Every precinct.
So every precinct, yeah.
$500,000, is that going to be this fiscal year? And how many lawyers and when are they going to be in the center?
So the service will be available in a month, so basically December 1st, and it will be as simple as calling 311 and then getting into a justice center to meet the lawyer. Yes, we'll use existing resources to start. Obviously, it'll be part of our next budget for our ongoing reasons. But this is something we want to start immediately, and we have existing resources we can tap into. Other question way back there, yes.
Do you know, you see that some of those victims could face language barrier reporting it. Do you have any resources to address that problem?
So, can I take that?
Yes, you may.
All right. So in a domestic violence case, we are moving borough by borough throughout the city. We started in Staten Island. We've completed the work in the Bronx. We're now in Queens North. We are going borough by borough with a new protocol that in a domestic violence case, before an officer leaves, the first responder leaves that domestic violence call, there has to either be a certified officer who listens to the person who has limited English proficiency, or they use language line, one or the other. So in exigent circumstances, you can use a bystander to translate, but in domestic violence situations, it's particularly problematic, as you can imagine, to do that frequently. And so in domestic violence situations, before you leave the scene, there has to either be an officer who is at a certain level of proficiency in that language, or they use language line, which they can access through their new cell phones. So technology is helping us serve people better in yet another way.
Yeah, just to emphasize that, so every officer now having a smartphone, that means they also have an instant translator. I mean, it's a really powerful example of one of the reforms the NYPD made. That imagine if it's a less spoken language and there is not an officer who speaks that language or someone else who can be formally brought in, literally put it on speakerphone and we have a translator available remotely who can help everyone work through the details. So I think that's one of the things that will really encourage people to feel supported.
And I would add, for my organization and many of the others in this room, we speak many different languages. We hire people who can, at Sanctuary we say we speak 30 different languages because we recognize the diversity of the city, and we know that clients feel much more comfortable when someone is speaking to them in their own language.
And might I also add that the Family Justice Centers are capable of serving anyone in the language that they speak.
Excellent. Any other questions on this topic? Yes.
You handle situations where the accuser decides that he or she no longer wants to pursue this, invites the accused back into the home? What do you do in those
You mean
situations?
if there is an order of exclusion?
The accused says, I don't want this anymore.
So our arrest procedure is initiated by a complaint. It's either initiated by a complaint from the victim or a neighbor or somebody else. If the victim says, this is the situation, I allowed it. If we don't have a complainant, you're not likely to have an arrest. There are cases, though, where there has been abuse or violence that is so serious that we'll arrest anyway, and we'll make a victimless case, and there'll be victimless prosecution.
Now or increase now, given that the NCOs are going to be patrolling where?
No. No.
We'll just have more information. That's the
Right.
difference now.
Right.
In the back, way in the back.
So I recently read the book Evicted, which focuses on the housing sort of evictions in Milwaukee. But one of the points that was made in the book, and I didn't know if this was the case in New York, is that domestic violence victims, when they would call the police repeatedly, that actually was grounds for a landlord to begin an eviction proceeding under the argument that if the police had to come regularly to an apartment or a building, that it was creating a nuisance. And I didn't know if there were any protections in place in New York that somehow protected tenants or residents from eviction when they made calls.
Well, part of I'll state the obvious and then let the experts speak. We don't want to see anyone who's been a victim evicted. Period. Anyone who's a survivor of domestic violence should not be evicted from their apartment, and that's why providing a lawyer is going to make a huge amount of difference. In terms of human rights protections and other questions here, who can speak to that?
That's why we have lawyers now
Yes,
who are going to
yeah.
fight on behalf of the victim.
Right.
And at least our experience at Sanctuary, that has not been an issue in New York City.
Good. Last call. Yes.
I believe last year there was a woman that was homeless and had an order of protection.
Louder, please. I'm sorry.
Last year there was a woman that was homeless and had an order of protection, and she was killed at one of the homeless shelters, I believe. Do these initiatives do anything to help homeless domestic victims of violence?
Well, the thing I'll start with, and my colleagues can add, is that two reasons we have a different approach now. One is previously, as you know, the NYPD has become much more deeply involved in the oversight of shelter security operations. Second, our NCO program comes with a mandate that our police, our neighborhood police, stay in close touch with shelters and make that part of their focus. So I think in terms of, again, that intelligence gathering and that proactive effort, you're going to see more of that because of those two realities.
And I would just reiterate that a violation of an order of protection is a mandatory arrest. We spoke mostly about exclusionary orders, but there can be no contact orders. There can be orders that just say stay this amount of space away from each other, or don't contact in this way or in that way. So any violation of an order of protection is a mandatory arrest. If we are aware of it, we will try and effect an arrest.
Okay, last call on this topic. Yes.
So I'm still confused about what will be changing in terms of NYPD enforcement of exclusion orders and orders of protection.
Again, one of the I'll do my summary and feel free to add. One, there's going to be a greater focus because, again, I think the big picture here is as we've driven down other types of crime, more focus is now going to move to domestic violence. Two, additional officers in general means more capacity to go after a whole host of things, including domestic violence. Three, we're going to proactively go to arrest when there's been a violation of an order, with or without a report from the victim. And we're going to have more intelligence gathering capacity, particularly because of the NCO program, to find abusers, even if we don't get that call from the victim. So it's a greater emphasis, it's more resources being placed on it, and it's a more assertive strategy to go for the arrest, even if we don't get that call from the victim. Okay, last call. Anything else? Okay, let's go on to other topics. Yes, Anna.
I was wondering why you think Vision Zero is not working on Staten Island. I had a story last week about some of the
You said, why do I think it's not working? I think it is working.
more people are getting killed in traffic accidents.
Anna, this is a long-term plan, and we expect it to keep producing results. But we also know there's going to be times when things, numbers go up, numbers go down. Every single time we lose someone is a tragedy. But this thing is growing. Vision Zero is growing all the time. There's more and more emphasis being put by the NYPD on checkpoints, on providing tickets on speeding and failure to yield. There are more and more traffic redesigns happening, obviously more bike lanes. There's a host of things that are moving. It does not mean the statistics will automatically work exactly the way we want them, but there's no question we saw the first 2 years how many lives were saved by Vision Zero. And Vision Zero is going to be here for the long haul, and we're just continually going to be adding to it. So I believe it does work, and I believe you'll see more and more results over time. Yes, Jen?
Mayor Blasio, I want to go back to this helicopter ride that was 2 weeks ago. I'm wondering, do you think you have an obligation to tell what you were doing, that you needed this ride because it was taxpayer, paid for it? And also, were you making campaign calls at Bar Toto? Is that why you feel like you can't?
Jen, we've done every form of disclosure we have to, and we follow exactly the rules as I talked about for any form of transportation. And if you have more questions about that, obviously direct them to NYPD. I just said all I'm going to say about it. Go ahead, Marcia.
Mr. Mayor, last week the number of homeless people surged to over 60,000 for the first time. There's been a growing chorus of people who have been critical of your homeless policies. Last week, Chris Quinn called on you to start leading, and today the controller has an audit that's highly critical of the services that children get when they're in shelter. I wonder if you could address two things. Number one, the broader question of the growing chorus of people critical of your homeless policies, and secondly, the specifics of the controller's audit, which says that children in shelters aren't getting the daycare and services that they need.
I have not seen the controller's audit. As you know, he's having his press conference later on, so after we've seen it, we'll certainly respond to it. On the broader point, we are in the middle of a very aggressive plan to change the homelessness situation in this city. And for a substantial amount of time, we saw stabilization of the numbers, then we saw them start to grow again. We're going to have to use more and more tools to combat that. We do know that anti-eviction efforts have really helped 24% decrease in evictions. We do know that we've got an extraordinary number of people out of shelter into permanent housing. But I would emphasize some of the biggest tools and weapons we have to address homelessness are on the way. The affordable housing plan, the 15,000 apartments, supportive apartments. There's a lot more coming, and we intend to turn the tide. It's going to be a long battle. I've said this before, I'll say it again. This is going to be a long battle. This is be a very difficult, complex problem, and very much undergirded by the cost of housing in this city. But we intend to turn the tide, and we're going to bring a lot of tools to bear to do that. Yeah.
Chris Quinn said that it might be helpful if you appointed a temporary housing czar, somebody to focus on the creation of affordable housing and to do it in a multi-year plan so that you could eliminate the not in my backyard syndrome that seems to be taking over. How do you feel about her suggestions, and do you think it would help? I appreciate that she's putting forward ideas, but I would say, first of all, obviously we have the most aggressive affordable housing plan that this city's ever had, and it's producing what it's supposed to. And the not in my backyard reality is not new to this time in our history. It's unfortunately a longstanding reality in New York City. It's exacerbated by the fact that we're a growing city. But I think we have a lot more to do to solve the problem and to show people how each step will work. And we're going to do that. We have a lot more we'll be saying in the coming weeks and months to lay out a long-term vision. But I don't think that's going to end the not in my backyard reality. Maybe for some it will be helpful to understand. I think the important thing is for us to continue to do what we think is right. I believe the vast majority of New Yorkers understand that if we're reducing evictions, if we're creating affordable housing, if we're building supportive housing, that those are the things we have to do to turn the tide. I also think New Yorkers are smart, and they realize that they really want to see homeless off the streets, and that will, in fact, mean more people have to go into shelter temporarily as we move them to permanent housing. We're going to keep explaining that, and I think over time we'll be able to turn the tide. Way in the back.
Mr. Mayor, should there be a school bus strike next week, what are the city's contingency plans?
At this point, as we've had obviously in the past, rumors of a potential strike, we've been able to deal with those in each and every time. So right now, I feel that the way we've handled things in the past worked. We'll continue to work with all parties to avert that. That's what I'll say at this point. Go ahead, way back.
Mayor, I wanted to get your reaction to the news that the Justice Department is bringing in their own people on the Eric Garner case and removing some of the New York-based investigators, and whether you think this is going to lead to charges for officers involved in Eric Garner's death, and what you make of the changes and the sense that that may be where we're headed.
I really don't speculate. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't speculate on the prosecution dynamics. But I'll say this much. I have tremendous respect for Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and the Justice Department has always been the gold standard in terms of protecting civil rights. So I'm sure she has her reasons for what she's done, and our message to her is we will cooperate in any way she asks. I think everyone wants to see things move speedily, but I respect her decision, certainly. Way back.
Just to Marcia's question, with the homeless population increasing again, I know that a lot of people have been going into hotels. Do you have a plan to, or do you think the city needs to step up its building of shelters or appropriating buildings as permanent shelter given the increase in the population that you're at now instead of reliance on hotels?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. And again, we'll outline more plans in the coming weeks. But first, the real solution here is the creation of affordable housing and supportive housing. And those plans are moving very aggressively. I think that's where you'll start to see a real change made. We've said very clearly it's two things we are adamant about. We want to get out of clusters, which have been not quality housing, and we want to get out of hotels. But you can imagine, while we're dealing with a lot of people who, for economic reasons, are falling into the shelter system, we've got to make sense of those realities day by day and create the balance on the way to the bigger changes and the bigger reforms. That's why there will be times when we cite shelters because we need that capacity as part of what's going to be a much bigger change in our approach to homelessness. For example, one of the things I've talked about is we want to reorient the shelter system to a more borough-based approach and then ultimately, hopefully, a more community-based approach. So folks, homeless families are not put in a situation where they come from Staten Island, but the shelter's in the Bronx. We want to get everyone into their home borough to begin. We think that's a better way to support children in particular and to have the support structure for that family nearby, and also a better way to help them to permanent housing, get them out of shelter. So there's a lot of reforms we're trying to make simultaneously. Obviously, we put a huge effort into improving shelter conditions, and we'll continue that. So I would say where we have to, we will open up new capacity with the goal of getting out of clusters, getting out of hotels. As the affordable housing comes online, then start to contract the shelter system. Our goal is as soon as possible, begin the process of turning things around and contracting. But I've said it's going to be a long battle. And I think, there's areas where we're going to be working on this adamantly for a long time until we can turn the tide. We're going to be very straightforward with people about that vision as we put it together.
Just to follow up, a lot of the homeless services providers in the city, including Christine Quinn last week, made comments to the effect that the affordable housing plan, the income bands might not go low enough for a lot of the people who are entering the shelter system. A lot of them have incomes that are 20 to 40% of AMI instead of the higher incomes that are a lot of the affordable housing plan. Any chance that you would revisit some of the income bands, expand it to go lower to accommodate some of the...
Well, it's a fair concern. I'd say two things. On the supportive housing, I believe we account for that concern right at the beginning. So that's 15,000 apartments unto itself. And I do want to note there's a very substantial element of the affordable housing that is those lowest income bands. We're always looking for where we can make improvements. So I'm not going to say we've made a specific change to our plan, but we're always looking for options to reach people at lower income levels. And there's a lot happening beyond our affordable housing plan as well. So, for example, when we stop an eviction, this is kind of a classic example. When we stop an eviction, we not only keep that family in affordable housing, we keep that unit affordable on an ongoing basis. So a lot of pieces to the equation. But we believe when you bring to bear the full force of everything we've been doing, the anti-eviction work, the 200,000 affordable apartments, the 15,000 supportive apartments, which is more than's ever been committed to by the city, and the work we're doing to keep people in their apartments with subsidies, that all of that will allow us to turn the tide. It will not happen overnight. It's going to be a long battle, but we believe we'll turn the tide. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, on Friday, a woman was tragically killed by an MTA bus, and the driver was arrested per the reform of the law in 2014 as part of the overall Vision Zero plan. In speaking with the union, they're concerned that moves to try to improve the technology of these buses has not moved fast enough, and they continue to maintain that in close quarters in Lower Manhattan and places like it, there are considerable blind spots even today. Are you concerned the MTA is not moving fast enough to deal with this technology that they've been talking about for a couple of years now?
I have talked to the MTA about this issue. I think they have a much more focused plan than they had a year or two ago to address the bus design, including all the new buses, which I think will be very much improved. I think that's one piece of the equation. I think there's obviously real considerations about routes, schedules, traffic design, some of which is our responsibility, some of which is the MTA's. We're certainly, as you've seen already, we're doing a lot of traffic redesign. Left-hand turns is a classic example. That helps the bus drivers. We've urged the MTA to look at everything. But we also know that there are times when, as with everything else in human life, there's an individual error, and that has to be held to account as well. So I would say it's all of the above. We're going to keep pushing the MTA to do more. That's certain. Yes.
So the chair of the city campaign finance board recently resigned. Do you have any plans of how to replace her? Do you have a short list of any kind? And do you know how long the process will take?
There will be a decision made in consultation with the city council speaker by the end of the year. My understanding is the current chair is going to stay on until December 31st. There's not a short list. We'll get to that. We obviously have a little bit of time, so we'll get to that. Josh.
When it comes to homeless shelters, New York City is one of the only cities in the country, maybe the only city in the country, that has a right to shelter. Other cities don't have. Your predecessor famously said he could take his private jet in his limo and walk in a homeless shelter, and they would have to take it. At some point, is there need to be a reconsideration of what rules and regulations people have to use homeless shelters, or do you think the current rules and regulations are fine?
I'd say a couple of things. The first is I think there's been some misrepresentation of the reality. There is a screening process for sure, and people who don't qualify are turned away. It's as simple as that. And we very much believe that people who have the option to stay with family members should. If we think that is a live option and an individual is not leveling with us about that reality, we turn them away. We also are trying to do more to support family members in accepting their loved one into their home, even if it's tight space. We want that to be a live option. It's unquestionably better than being in shelter. If you go to the home of an aunt and uncle, for example, we're willing to help you financially with that. But it's unquestionably better for a person or a family to be in a family setting, kids especially, than to end up in a shelter. So I think there's been a misrepresentation of the process. It is a rigorous process. On the bigger question you raise, I think the core notion is correct. Our law is essentially right, even though we have to keep making sure the standards are tight and the enforcement of those standards is tight. Here's why. I have talked to innumerable people in places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, Oregon, none of which have that right in the law, and all of which have very, very problematic street homelessness situations, far beyond anything we have. And it is corrosive to the community. It's corrosive to the business environment. I don't think it's particularly fair to the individuals involved. All of them have a different tradition in terms of how their government's work. And I respect those cities and their leaders, but I'm saying I think here what we've found is this legal reality means that, thank God, very few people end up living on the streets. You see a lot of people during the day, and this is something Commissioner Bratton used to talk about a lot. None of us know how to fully discern a person, for example, who's panhandling and has a place to live versus a person who's out during the day and then goes to a shelter versus a person who is on the streets 24/7. There's just not a way at this moment to fully know that, although Homestat is helping us to understand it. But here's the reality. We've seen it consistently in every measure, federal and local. The number of people who are on the streets 24/7 are between 3,000 and 4,000. That's been a very consistent number over the last few years. Compare that to those West Coast cities where it's many, many more thousands. I think that is a recommender of the approach we take.
What do you think would happen if a city said, we no longer have a right to shelter? Besides more people being on the street, are there other deleterious effects that you think we would see?
We could analyze that more closely. As you know, this has been the law for quite a while. But I would argue to you that a huge increase in street homelessness in the city would be very, very much of a setback at a point when the city, in many ways, economically is doing better. I think it would be foolish to risk a massive increase in street homelessness. Matt.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could update us on the city's failures in the Deborah Danner and the Zamir Perkins case.
On the Danner situation, I think you know everything I know at this point, that we're going to await the decisions by the district attorney on next steps. And then when the time is right, of course, there'll be our own internal process. But I think Commissioner O'Neill has been clear and honest with the people of this city. I commend him for it. I have heard so many New Yorkers say thank you for his honesty and his forthright leadership. Obviously he will speak separately to any other lessons learned. As he said, they're assessing that case to see if there's other systemic issues that have to be addressed. But in terms of the procedure, the next step obviously lies with District Attorney Clark.
Just on the Zamir Perkins case.
Again, as I've said, there is an ongoing investigation by the DA. I spoke to the DA again, and that's projected to go on a bit longer in terms of them wanting the city to hold back from interviewing the individual employees. We have been working on some additional changes and reforms. I hope we'll have announcements on those very soon.
Mr. Mayor, the specifics of a couple of Fridays ago aside, can you give us a little bit of insight into how you determine what time to block off for political or campaign activities? Obviously, you've said being mayor is a 24/7 job.
Yep.
So how do you approach that, generally speaking, and what is your plan for that?
We try and figure out a balance. There's obviously, it's a 24/7 job. I wish I could describe it to you guys in a way that would make sense, but it begins in the morning, it ends in the night, and it never goes away. I tend to wake up in the morning. Doesn't that sound good? Yeah. I tend to, careful what you wish for, Tish. I typically get up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning and look at my BlackBerry and start answering emails then. And I typically go to bed between 11 p.m. and midnight, and I'm answering emails till right about that time. And the weekends are a little better, but they're not profoundly different. It's just constant calls, emails throughout the day. So in that, it's a great question. What do you do? Because we're in a democracy and there's campaigns and you have to do all the things around a campaign. We try to carve out time in between other things. It all depends on the day and what's going on. I think the simplest answer is, as a campaign year is emerging, and everyone knows, we're 2 weeks away from this primary being just 10 months off. So we're 10 and a half months away from a primary. You got to put more time into building up the apparatus. So, we try and find a way to carve out time. It's not always easy. We do the best we can.
Sort of blocks weekly that you,
It theoretically, but it doesn't work out that way a lot of the time. Let me go get a couple more.
Mayor, the Podesta leak emails have shown them continually criticizing you for failing to endorse Hillary Clinton.
I'm crushed.
Are you at all concerned that if Hillary Clinton is elected, that will hurt your efforts to kind of get her to pass policy issues that help the city?
No. No, I think, first of all, I think Hillary Clinton cares so deeply for New York City and New York State. But let me also, again, try and give a little insight here. I think everyone in this room has been on a team. And when you have a relationship with teammates, you know, you have ups and downs, agreements and disagreements. I go back a long way with all these folks. And, you know, obviously 16 years with Hillary herself and most of her inner circle, people like Neera Tanden. More recently with John Podesta, Robbie Mook. I consider them all friends. I consider them all people who are on the side of the angels. And I have worked with and supported in a lot of ways. And but we're going to have disagreements. We're going to have disagreements. It's natural. It's normal. And I've been very overt about the fact that I want to see the Democratic Party move in a more progressive direction. I want to see a very bold approach to addressing economic inequality. Some people like that more, some people like that less. And by the way, when you're nudging your friends to go farther, you know, sometimes people push back or find that unpleasant. But that's what I'm going to do. There's no question of the depth of the relationships. And there's certainly no question about Hillary's commitment to New York. Bob?
Back in April, the Equal Opportunity Commission found and substantiated complaint by 1180 that represents administrative managers that there was systemic issues going back, you know, many, many years. And then we had just recently about 10 civilian FDNY as administrative managers also have a press conference and announce they're launching an EOC complaint. The EOC puts it about some $240 million potentially. Are you actively negotiating? We know that your administration was committed to dealing with these systemic issues of race in terms of policing. Isn't it logical if these kinds of things existed historically in the way the city administered?
I think, is there structural racism? Are there other larger realities? Of course, that does not mean each one of these cases is as the specific complaint indicates. We have to look at each one individually. You'll remember we made a major change with school safety agents because we saw a disparity. So we're going to address all sorts of disparities. But we also know that sometimes good people claim that something is different than what we see it as, or that it would cost a lot more to solve than we see it as. We have an obligation to the taxpayers to strike that balance. So there have been constant conversations with 1180. We haven't resolved everything. I would also say, you know, we see different levels of government come back with rulings. That doesn't mean we agree with everything. Just like a federal judge may at the district level say one thing and we disagree, we'll go to the appeal level. So ongoing discussions. I don't think the underlying concern is unfair. I think the specific outcome they desire, we believe, doesn't reflect the whole reality. Way back.
About domestic violence, we know that unfortunately Hispanics have a very high number of incidents, and we're not even considering all of the undocumented. We know your administration is trying to reach out to them. We've done efforts with you. We visited the new center like this one in Staten Island.
Yes.
Can you please send a message to our community, especially to those undocumented, so that they know that there are services available in centers like this one?
I'll start, and then if the deputy commissioner or the commissioner, if you want to favor us with some Spanish commissioner, you can do that. It's up to you. But I will say, look, everyone will be protected. Does not matter what your documentation status is. Everyone will be protected. And we don't want anyone holding back because they fear that it could affect their immigration reality. We're here to protect everyone. We're here to protect women who have been abused and make sure they get the support they need, and that is regardless of documentation status. Do you want to?
We do not ask a victim what their documentation status is. We never, ever ask a victim that. They may be afraid that we will. We get out that message as much as we can. With our new efforts on the ground, we'll be able to get that message out more, but we rely on OCDV, Cecile Noel, Commissioner Noel, and others to reiterate and to reassure people, and the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Affairs, to reassure people that the NYPD, when someone seeks assistance, we do never ask their status.
I just want to add that there are remedies under the immigration law that allow victims of crime, victims of trafficking, and victims of domestic violence to be protected. So that message should go out as well.
Do you want to add?
En español.
Sí, claro que sí.
Claro, bueno, la ley protege a todas las víctimas de abuso doméstico, sea cual sea el estatus de inmigración, ¿verdad? Como la ley laboral que nosotros enforzamos en la Agencia de Servicios al Consumidor, si la persona va a tomar un día libre porque tiene que hacer su plan de seguridad, ese día se lo van a pagar. Todos los neoyorquinos están bienvenidos en los centros de justicia de familia. Ahí van a recibir servicios y no se les pregunta de dónde son o cuál es su estatus migratorio.
Perdón.
Okay, please.
También quiero añadir que es una oportunidad que muchas víctimas de crímenes tienen protecciones que al acudir a esta ayuda también puede empezar un proceso donde su estatus puede ser clarificado como son víctimas. Creo que es la visa U y creo que es también muy importante de que reconozcamos que esto es una oportunidad de darle la oportunidad a las víctimas que puedan en verdad salir de las sombras y salir para ayuda, no tan solo para su estatus migratorio, pero también ayuda inmediata a su caso de violencia doméstica.
Muchas gracias. We'll do a few more before we have to go. David.
Question to the First Lady. This is the second time in the last few days that you've been at the center of a press conference, and I wondered if that's something we can expect more of in the future, and what is your role going to be in the 2017 campaign?
I said I was going to be an active partner to my husband, and I will continue to be. When there's news to announce, I'll be here, and when there is not, I won't be.
Soundbite. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of weeks back, the Citizens Budget Commission released a report expressing concern about a special annuity fund that only the teachers have that's guaranteed annually by taxpayers at 7%. I was wondering if you share the CBC's concern and whether you plan to address that annuity fund through collective bargaining or otherwise.
I haven't seen the report, and I'd need to do that to be able to comment on that properly. Let me see. There's one more before we go. Yes, Jen.
We had an op-ed by John Samuelson of the TWU where he said he was going to urge other unions not to support you, that you haven't been supportive to organized labor, that it's phony. I just wanted to see if you wanted to respond to that, and also, are you worried about whether you're going to have support from unions in 2017?
No. First of all, I've devoted a lot of my public life to trying to uplift working people, and I've worked very closely with the labor movement, and I believe fundamentally in expanding the labor movement and protecting the rights of working people. I think if you look just at our relationship with municipal labor alone, where over 90% of unions are under contract now compared to 0% the day we walked in the door, and the collaborative, positive atmosphere that exists between management and labor in this city compared to a very contentious one just a few years ago, I feel that a lot of people think that's the right way to go, and that will be reflected in their attitude going forward. Thanks, everyone.
You a professional, right? You a professional.